Steve Jobs, the man who changed the world. Imagine a man who was fired from the very company he created, a man who at 17 had no place to sleep, crashing on dorm room floors of strangers, returning empty bottles just to afford food. A man who was told by doctors, "You have cancer, you have months to live." And yet, this same man built a company worth $1 trillion. He put a device in our pockets that changed the way we communicate, listen to music, work, and see the world. This is not a story about a genius. This is a story about how a dream turns out to be stronger than reality. A story about falls that become launching pads, about betrayals that forge character, about death that teaches you how to live. Welcome to the Top People. Today, Steve Jobs, an unwanted child. February 24th, 1955, San Francisco, California. A young student named Joanne Schiebel gave birth to a baby boy out of wedlock. Her family was horrified. The child's father, a Syrian graduate student named Abdul Fattah Jandali, couldn't marry her because of her strict parents. Joanne made the most difficult decision of her life, to give the child up for adoption. But with one condition, the adoptive parents had to be college educated. The first couple offered the baby turned it down at the last minute. They wanted a girl. Fate then brought the baby boy to Paul and Clara Jobs. Simple people. Paul was a mechanic. Clara was a bookkeeper. Neither had a college degree, but Joanne agreed. She saw warmth and love in them. They promised to give the boy everything they could, including a college education. And so Stephen Paul Jobs came into the world, the garage as the first university. The family lived in Mountain View, a suburb of San Francisco that today is called the heart of Silicon Valley. But back then it was just a quiet neighborhood with modest homes and wide backyards. Father Paul loved working with his hands. He spent hours in the garage tinkering with cars, electronics, wood, and little Steve sat beside him watching, touching, learning. It was here, in that garage, that Jobs first understood. Things can be taken apart and put back together. You can understand how they work. You can make them better. Paul gave Steve a section of his workbench and said, "This is yours." It was the first lesson about ownership, responsibility, and that creativity begins with tools in your hands. Smart but difficult. In school, Steve was a challenging student, incredibly intelligent, and impossible to manage. He was bored in class, pulled pranks, ignored rules. Teachers didn't know what to do with him. Once he placed a firecracker under a teacher's chair, he nearly got expelled. But one teacher, Imogene Hill, saw something special in him. She offered him a deal. If Steve could finish a complex math workbook in a week, she would buy him ice cream. He finished it. Then another. Then another. Later, Jobs would say she was one of the few people who changed his life. She didn't try to break me. She tried to ignite me. The meeting that changed everything. In 1971, 16-year-old Steve met 21-year-old Steve Wozniak at a party. Wozniak, a genius of electronics. Jobs, a genius of vision. They were complete opposites. Wozniak was quiet, humble, in love with circuits and chips. Jobs was charismatic, bold, dreaming of something bigger. But they shared one thing: a passion for technology and a desire to do the impossible. Their first project together, the so-called Blue Box, a device that allowed free long-distance calls by hacking the phone networks. They sold it to college students in dorms for $150 each. Legally, it was a crime. Morally, a gray area. But for Jobs, this was his first business experience. Create something people want and sell it. Reed College, 6 months and a dropout. In 1972, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, one of the best liberal arts colleges in the U.S. His mother, Clara, had dreamed of this. His father, Paul, worked overtime to save the tuition. But after just 6 months, Jobs dropped out. Not because he couldn't study, but because he could see his parents spending their last money on classes that didn't interest him. He felt ashamed, but he didn't go home. He stayed on campus unofficially for another 18 months, sleeping on friends' floors, eating at a local Har Krishna temple, returning glass bottles for cash, and attending calligraphy lectures by choice, simply because he was curious. 10 years later, that calligraphy would become the foundation for the beautiful fonts of the first Macintosh. If I had never dropped in on that single course, Jobs would say, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces. India, Zen, and the search for self. In 1974, Jobs got a job at Atari, a pioneer of the gaming industry. But his soul was searching for something else. He traveled to India. 7 months. Ashrams, meditation, a shaved head, torn clothes, illness. He was looking for spiritual enlightenment. But he found something else. The realization that Western logic and Eastern intuition are not opposites. They complement each other. Back home, he began practicing Zen Buddhism. That philosophy, like simplicity, attention to detail, the search for essence, permeated everything he created going forward. The Garage on Christ Drive, April 1st, 1976. April Fool's Day. Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne co-founded Apple Computer. Wayne exited the partnership after 12 days, selling his share for $800. Today, it would be worth tens of billions. The first computer, Apple I, was literally assembled by hand by Wozniak. It was a bare circuit board with no case, no keyboard, no screen. Buyers had to add all of that themselves. Jobs saw potential where others saw an engineer's hobby. He negotiated a deal with a local store for an order of 50 units at $500 each. That gave them their startup capital. Apple II, the first real success. The Apple II was a revolution. A beautiful case, color graphics, a built-in keyboard. It was the first personal computer you actually wanted to put on your living room desk. Jobs insisted on design. He studied Braun consumer electronics, cars, furniture. The computer shouldn't intimidate. It should invite. By 1980, Apple went public with an IPO. Steve Jobs, at 25, became a multi-millionaire. It was one of the largest IPOs in Silicon Valley history at that point. Time magazine put him on the cover. He was young, bold, rich. It seemed like everything was just beginning. Xerox PARC. The theft that changed computers. In 1979, Jobs visited the Xerox PARC Research Center. There he saw something incredible. A computer with a graphical interface, a mouse, windows on the screen. Xerox didn't understand what they had. Jobs understood instantly. They showed me gold and didn't know it was gold, he would say later. This became the foundation for the Macintosh. Jobs didn't just copy the idea, like he transformed it into something fundamentally different. More elegant, more accessible, more human. The 1984 ad and the birth of a legend. On January 22, 1984, during the Super Bowl, a commercial aired that is still called the greatest advertisement of all time. Directed by Ridley Scott. A young female athlete runs through a hall where faceless people stare at a screen showing Big Brother. She hurls a hammer. The screen explodes. A voice says, "On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. The next day, Jobs walked on stage. He pulled a flat computer from a cloth bag, and the Macintosh spoke. "Hello, I'm Macintosh." The audience erupted in applause. People cried. This was something more than a product launch. This was the birth of a culture. The dark side. But backstage, there was chaos. Jobs was an unbearable leader. He publicly humiliated employees, called their ideas crap, demanded the impossible on unrealistic timelines. He divided people into geniuses and idiots, and could switch the same person between categories in a single conversation. Many quit. Many hated him. And yet, they followed him, because under his leadership they did things they themselves didn't believe possible. Betrayal and exile. In 1985, Jobs was stripped of his role leading Macintosh. The board sided with CEO John Sculley, the man Jobs himself had once lured away from Pepsi with the famous question, "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water? Or do you want a chance to change the world?" Sculley betrayed him. The board voted against him. Jobs was 30 years old. He was fired from the company he had founded in a garage. "I had been publicly humiliated," he would say later. "And I was ashamed to even make eye contact with people in Silicon Valley. I thought I had failed." For months, he couldn't get out of bed. Next, an expensive lesson. After leaving Apple, Jobs founded Next Computer. He wanted to build the perfect computer for scientists and students. Next was breathtaking. A perfect black cube. But it cost $10,000. The market didn't embrace it. Yet it was on the Next platform that Tim Berners-Lee created the first web browser and wrote the first website in history. Without Next, the internet as we know it would not exist. Pixar. Fairy tales worth billions. In 1986, Jobs purchased a small computer graphics division from George Lucas for $10 million. It was Pixar. The next several years were agonizing. Pixar lost money. Jobs poured more than $50 million of his own dollars into it. But in 1995, Toy Story was released, the first feature-length computer animated film in history. Box office, $362 million. Pixar went public. In a single day, Jobs became a billionaire. And it taught him something vital. Sometimes you just have to believe long enough. The return to Apple. By 1997, Apple was on the verge of bankruptcy. Losses of $1 billion per year. Products in chaos. Shares had fallen to $3. Apple purchased Next for $427 million. And Jobs came back. First as an advisor, then as interim CEO, then simply as CEO. He walked onto the stage in jeans and a black turtleneck. The audience gasped. The prodigal son had come home. His first move? He cut the product line from 40 down to 4. Fired hundreds of people. Cut a deal with Microsoft, Apple's greatest enemy, for $150 million in investment. It was a scandal, but it saved the company. iMac. Think different. In 1998, Apple unveiled the iMac. Translucent, colorful, looking like something from another world. Competitors laughed. Buyers lined up. 800,000 units were sold in 6 weeks. The Think Different advertising campaign became a manifesto. Posters of Einstein, Gandhi, Picasso, Martin Luther King. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. iPod and iTunes, music in your pocket. In 2001, Jobs uttered a phrase that would be remembered forever. 1,000 songs in your pocket. The iPod changed the music industry. The iTunes Store gave people the ability to buy individual songs for 99 cents and ended the era of CD piracy. The record labels hated Jobs, but they had to sign contracts because he already had the audience. iPhone, the phone that changed everything. January 9th, 2007, Macworld Expo. Jobs walked on stage and said, "Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. Today, Apple is introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, the most revolutionary phone, and a breakthrough internet device. This is not 3 separate devices. This is one device." The room fell silent. Then it exploded with applause. Nokia, BlackBerry, Motorola watched and didn't understand what had just happened. Within a few years, they had all either gone bankrupt or lost their market dominance. The iPhone became the most profitable product in the history of commerce. iPad, the device nobody believed in. When Apple announced the iPad in 2010, tech journalists mocked it. It's just a big iPod Touch. Who needs this? In its first year, 15 million tablets were sold. Today, the iPad is an entire industry. The diagnosis. In 2003, doctors discovered that Jobs had a rare form of pancreatic cancer, but it was a specific type, a neuroendocrine tumor, which is treatable if acted upon immediately. Jobs did not act immediately. For 9 months, he tried to treat it with diets, acupuncture, and spiritual practices. He refused surgery. When he finally agreed to the operation, time had been lost. The cancer had spread. Many consider this a tragic mistake. Jobs himself didn't like to talk about it. The Stanford speech. In 2005, Jobs addressed the graduating class at Stanford University. This speech became one of the most watched in the history of YouTube. 3 stories about dropping out of college, about being fired from Apple, about death. Every morning I look in the mirror and ask myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Stay hungry, stay foolish. The last keynote. In 2011, Jobs took the stage for the last time. He introduced iCloud. He was thin, weak. The black turtleneck seemed too large on him, but his voice was steady, his eyes burning. On October 5th, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away. He was 56 years old. Around the world, people brought flowers and apples to Apple Store entrances. President Obama called him America's greatest innovator. Bill Gates wrote, "The world rarely sees someone who has had the profound impact Steve has had. The legacy he left behind, the iPhone, iPad, Mac, iPod, iTunes, App Store, Pixar, Apple stores, and a culture that changed the way humanity interacts with technology. He was not a perfect human being. He abandoned his biological daughter. He was cruel to employees. He manipulated people. But he believed deeply, fanatically, ferociously that technology and art could merge into one, that a tool could be beautiful, that a machine could be human. And he was right. Steve Jobs once said, "Death is very likely the single best invention of life. It clears out the old to make way for the new." He lived 56 years. In that time, he accomplished more than most of us would in 3 lifetimes. He didn't just create products, he created the future. And as you watch this on the screen of the phone in your pocket, a piece of his dream lives in your hands. Thank you for watching Top People. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Whose story do you want to hear next? See you next time.